All right, section 2.5, equations, tables, and graphs. So if you would pause your video for a second and write down this vocab word. And then on number 1, so we'll start with number 1. Make a table and sketch a graph of the path of a submersible, which would be like a submarine, diving at 50 feet per minute. The depth of the submersible is represented by the equation D equals negative 50m, where D is the depth and M is the number of minutes. Okay, so talking about your input and your output, which would go with input, M or D? M. So M is going to go with input, D is going to go with output. We're talking about M meaning minutes. Can you have negative minutes? No. So we're not going to start with that XY chart we did before with -2 because we can't have -2 minutes. We're just going to start at 0 and work our way up. So then we're going to plug in our numbers. So -50 times 0 would just be 0. -50 times 1.
-50.
Okay. -50 times 2.
-100.
-100, and we're just going to keep going down by 50. Okay, so then, yes.
Where do you get the 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4?
So I can't start at -2 like I did last week because I can't have -2 minutes. So I'm going to start at 0 minutes and just kind of go up by a minute each time. Okay, so when I'm graphing this is actually like a normal graph, but I'm basically in quadrant 3 the whole time. This is essentially like an enlarged quadrant 3 because I have -y, and I can't go into the positives right there because I can't have negative minutes. So if I were graphing this on regular graph paper, I would just have everything in quadrant 3. Okay, so like looking at a piece of regular graph paper, right? Everything here that I'm graphing is in quadrant 3. This is basically like a blown up quadrant 3 right here on the graph, on the paper. Yes.
I thought quadrant 3 was negative.
I'm sorry, quadrant 4, not quadrant 3. Quadrant 4. Way to catch me. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to graph this. So the y-axis only goes down to -10, but I need it to go to -200. What should I do? What do you think I could go by?
50.
50s or 25s probably would be good. So if I make each one of these boxes 25 maybe, so this would be -100, and this would be -200, and then I just need to graph. Okay, so in before I put arrows going both directions. However, this time I can't go into the negative minutes, so I'm not gonna have an arrow up at the top, but I am gonna have an arrow going down. Okay, so then the last thing we're going to talk about on this graph is what is my y-intercept? So where does the graph cross the y-axis?
At 0.
At 0. So my y-intercept, or we use the variable b to represent that, would be 0. The graph crosses the y-axis at 0.
B represents what?
Y-intercept.
What's that?
B is the variable used for y-intercept. Just all throughout math. Not like just in my class. Okay, number 2. The height h of an airplane s seconds from takeoff is h equals 12s. Make a table and sketch a graph of the equation. Okay, so again, our input goes with s. Our output goes with h. So s seconds. Can you have -2 seconds? No. So again, I'm going to start at 0 because I can't have negative seconds. And I'm going to plug in my numbers. So 12 times 0
0,
would be 0.
2,
12 times 1,
12,
12. So I'm going to go up by 12 every time.
36. Down
Okay, so then on my y-axis, it only goes up to 10, but I need to get up to 48. What could I go up by?
12.
12s or 6s. So I'm actually going to make like every 2 boxes would be 12. So that would be going up by 6s. Would probably be the easiest. And then graph this.
There's 2 5s on there.
It's like, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5,
That's a
7.
6. It's just probably hard to see. Okay, so again, I couldn't go into the negative seconds, so I'm not going to have an arrow right here, but I will have an arrow at the top. Okay, and what was your y-intercept? Where did the graph cross the y-axis? It happened again at 0. It doesn't always happen at 0. It just happens to be a coincidence.
And would it not be at 0?
It won't always be at 0. Yeah, it can start at a different number.
Like what?
All right, we are using a table to make a graph and write equations. So we're kind of working backwards this time. So we have the table, but we don't have the equation or the graph. So here's how we're going to write the equation. So we're going to use something called slope-intercept form. So this is slope-intercept form. And this is something that you're going to work with all throughout the rest of 8th grade math and through like all of the rest of your math classes in the future. So this is called slope-intercept form.
Is that a T or a plus?
Oh, that's a plus. Mx plus b. The m in this formula stands for the slope, and that's m always stands for slope in algebra. And we're going to learn a formula for that later. Like I'll teach you how to calculate slope, but for today, we're just going to look at the pattern in order to find the slope. So we're not going to calculate any formula yet, but we will. And then b, we already have learned, stands for the y-intercept. Okay, so if we look at this chart, we have to find m and we have to find b. So your y-intercept is generally on your chart, and it should be pretty easy to find. Wherever x equals 0, y is your y-intercept. So x equals 0, y equals 0. So in this case, b happens to be 0. So you look for your chart and you look at x equals 0 and then look at the y that goes with that, and that's your y-intercept. Okay, now look at your pattern. So look at what's happening on your y side of your chart. What's happening with your numbers? What are they doing? They're increasing by 6, okay? So our pattern that's happening is adding 6 every time. So what we're going to do is plug this into that slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. So y equals, our m is positive 6, so I'm just going to put 6. And then x plus b, our b is 0. So plus 0. Okay, so I really don't have to have that plus 0 because it really, adding 0 doesn't change anything. So I can simplify this to just y equals 6x. So either of those equations would be right. And then I just need to graph this. That's the only thing I have left to do. So I would probably go up by 6's again. Or I'll make each box worth 3. And I don't really have any indication of what this chart is about, so I'm going to go ahead and put my 2 arrows like normal, assuming that it would also go into the negatives, because I don't have any, I don't know what the chart, the data is from, so I could assume that it goes into the negative. Okay, so we're going to go through that same process again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead 2, and I'm going to have you guys come back and do the next one on your own. So we're going to skip this one. You're going to do this one on your own here in just a minute, and then we're going to go to this problem. And we'll do this one together. Okay, so in this case, I'm kind of working backwards. I jumped ahead of myself here, I'm sorry. Back up. I went ahead of myself. Let's do this together. Okay, so again, everybody find this on your paper. So this is, we're gonna make the graph and find the equation. So we need to find M and B. So look, to find B, look where x equals 0, and the y that goes with that would be your y-intercept. So right here at -1, where x equals 0. So my b is -1.
What if x don't equal 0?
What if I don't have it? Then I have to look at my graph when I graph it. That's a good question. Like, what if it's not given to you? Then you would have to look at it on your graph once you graph it. Okay, now look for your pattern. What's happening on your y-axis or on your y side of your chart? Okay, so you're adding 1 every time. So my m would be 1. So then I'm going to build my equation. So y equals mx plus b, and plug in my m and b. So y equals m is 1, 1x, and b is -1. So plus -1. Okay, so we're going to simplify this a little bit. Y equals, you don't really have to have that 1 in front of the x, but we can put it there. And then if you take plus a -1, what are you actually doing? Subtracting. So we're going to put -1 instead of having 2 signs there. And then we need to graph it. Okay, so we're going to skip this problem for now, and you're going to come back to it. And we're going to go to this problem. So we're kind of working backwards again, except instead of being given a chart, now we're given the graph. So we're given the graph, and we have to make the chart and find the equation. So what we're going to have to do is take the graph and use it to get points. We're going to take the graph and use it to get points. So what I would recommend that you do is, most generally, you're going to end up seeing the middle part of your graph where you have, like, you're going to go through 0. So you could start by writing this part of your chart, like we did last week, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so if you look at this graph, at x equals -2, which is right here, it does not show what that is. It doesn't even go down to it. Like you would assume it's maybe somewhere right here, but we're not going to estimate on this. So what we're going to do is just skip that point. We're not going to do it. So let's look at x equals -1. So at x equals -1 right here, what's our y value? -3. So I'm going to write that in. At x equals 0, y is 0. And then our next one would be x equals 1. Y is right here at +3. And then for 2, again, it's probably somewhere up here, but we're not going to estimate it, so we're just not going to do that point. Okay, so now we need to find our m and our b. It's off the graph, so we're not going to do those. So we could cross these out. We're not going to do those. So what is our y-intercept? Where does the graph cross the y-axis? So you can either look at your graph or look at your chart.
0.
At 0. And then we need to look for the pattern.
3.
Plus or minus. So it's adding 3. Okay, so then we'll plug it into our formula. So y equals 3x plus 0. So our intercept is 0. Okay, so I don't necessarily have to have that 0 there. So I could just write y equals 3x is my equation. Okay, so now I want you to go back and do the problem we skipped. So you're going to start with making your chart. So I would start with -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. So pause your video and do this problem. So for -2, if you are looking at your coordinates, -2, you should get -1, -1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, and 2, 3. So this right here would represent your y-intercept. So b equals 1. And then your pattern that's happening is increasing by 1 every time. So +1. So then your equation would be y equals 1x plus 1. So hopefully you got that. You could even write, you can drop that 1 in front of the x and just write x plus 1. That would also be fine. Okay, so for your assignment is page 72 and 73, and you will need some graph paper.